Alright, I wanted to do a video. Sorry. I wanted to do a video that really talks about an issue that I've kind of avoided in a way for quite some time, and that is basically growing up without a father, which is the first part, and then the second part, black men not raising their children, right? So there are two sections, very related, but two sections. One, I'm the youngest. First off, I'm the youngest of four that my mother and father had. We both share, all of us share the same mother and father. My parents were married for over 30 something years. Both of my parents were born in 1932. My father was just a few months older than my mother. He died when I was 16. And my mother is still alive, and she still lives in Kentucky. Wonderful, wonderful woman. They divorced. They were doing their divorce and everything a little bit before I was born. I was kind of like an oops, if you will. They were trying to get back together and smooth things out. And then they had me. They had me. My mother had me late in life. She was like in her late 40s, 46, I think, when she had me. So I was a high-risk pregnancy. My next sister in line is 14 years older than me, to give you an idea. I was an uncle before I was born because my oldest sister had already 3 kids at that point. One of her kids is 4.5 years older than me. The other one's about 2 years older than me. And then she has a son that is the exact same age I am, born same month, same year. I'm just a few days older than he is. So my father and mother basically divorced due to just differences. They grew apart over time, that type of thing. And so I grew up without a father. Now, at this point in time, unlike today, marriages and divorces were not as big as they are today. So when I was growing up and going through school, most of the kids I was going to school with had both parents, or at least there was a boyfriend or girlfriend involved. And so they really and truly said, well, my stepdad this or my stepmom that type of thing. But they at least had both, like two people to help raise them. I didn't have that. And I've always been the biggest kid. When we're talking like from elementary up until middle school, I was always the kid that towered above everyone else until about middle school. And then, there were kids much taller than me, but I was always the tallest. So the perception was I knew how to play basketball because I was tall and I was black. And at the time, Jordan and all these people were, rocking it in, in basketball. So that was the perception, right? Or that I could run really fast. Now, true, back in the day, I used to run track and I was pretty quick. But basketball, not so much. It wasn't my thing, and still really isn't my thing. I mean, I like watching it, love watching football more. But yet I don't really know all of the particulars. Like if some people some guys, they can sit and talk about stats and, history of different plays and history of different players and that type of thing. I'm just not one of those guys. You have some people that even keep up with the current stuff. Well, I think this person's going to do great this year, but such and such's offense is really good. I'm not that type of guy, So even today, not having a father has impacted me all the way up until this point. Now, sure, I can easily go and learn, the different rules of football, the different rules of basketball, the different rules of everything, and probably go through and thumb through and read all of the history of, the greatest events that happened in sports history. That's just not me. I'm a fan of football. Colts and the Seahawks are my teams. I definitely watch football every single year, but as far as being a veteran of the sport, it's just not my thing. And it could be too because, again, I just didn't have that influence early on in life. So it was difficult growing up without a father because you had kids that assumed that you know how to play basketball, and when you try to throw a ball up and you hit bricks every single time, they soon start to kind of not want to hang out with you or play sports with you. Sorry, Zarbian came in. So, they tend to not want to play with you. And then it kind of becomes this running joke. You have this huge black dude, tall black guy who can't play basketball. Now, while that's kind of normal, It shouldn't be an issue because if I was a tall white kid or a tall Asian kid, no one would make a big deal about it. But everyone has their stereotypes, right? So every race has their own stereotypes that people have made up. So, I kind of dealt with it, but I hated it. I hated it. And, finally, as I went through school and that type of thing, those types of pressures kind of went away and got less and less and less. And then as I got into college, that just wasn't the case. But it was something that I had to pretty much deal with. And I didn't like that. So I try to exceed in other areas. I try to compensate in areas that, I didn't, in areas that I didn't have. So the fact that my sisters, you got to keep in mind too, the next sister in line to me in terms of age is 14 years older than me, So all of them had some sort of an experience with having both parents in the household, at least until, they were like almost, my second sister almost in high school herself, they had my father and mother. I didn't have either. I can count on both hands how many times I had an interaction with my father in person. When he died when I was 16, he died of lung cancer. He had told my sister, the one that's closer in age to me, what do I do? What do I say to him? Because she kept begging him to try to talk to me and that type of thing. And he's like, what can I say to him now? What can I say now? I'm on my deathbed, what can I say to him to get through to him or to show him that I, care for him or I love him, and then he died, he died when I was 16. And to be honest with you, the funeral was really awkward for me because I had to go there with people who were grieving, crying, and I felt so strange because I had no emotion. Not because I was angry or mad or anything like that. I just did not know my father well enough to cry. I was sad, obviously, because, a death is sad to begin with. It's horrible, and for someone to die. It was horrible. I felt horrible. But I just didn't have the emotions to really cry. When I got into the car to leave, when we were leaving the funeral, my eldest sister was in the car. And she was crying. That made me cry because I got to thinking, like, what does this mean to them? Like the impact. Because here I am, I'm used to not having him anyway. And here they are. My eldest sister got to see him, from birth all the way up into, having her kids and stuff like that, her first kid, and even her second kid. And what does that feel like? And all of them can relate. All of them could relate at that point, that this was powerful. Now, you got to keep in mind, I have 3 sisters. The middle sister died the year before. Okay, so she died literally the year before my dad died in the same month of November. So for a while, November was a very tough month. So she wasn't there, but so we were dealing with all of that emotion, and I was close to my middle sister. That emotion was really difficult for me. And that was the first time when my sister died, that was the first time that my father and I had hugged. Ever. The first time I could ever, and actually I had to hug him because he was there crying. He saw her dead and I hugged him. We cried together. That was a very special moment for me that I'll never forget. And when my father did pass and I couldn't shed a tear, I felt horrible. And I felt like, who am I? Like, why am I felt evil. I felt like a bad person. And then I heard a Tupac song where, Tupac was made to believe that his dad died, and his mother, I believe, said that she wanted him to think that because she didn't want him to grow up knowing that his father was still alive and choosing not to be a part of his life. And so he made a song about the fact that he didn't cry when his father died, I felt that way too. And at the time, Tupac was big. And, at the time, that was the song that I listened to. As a few years went by, I started to listen to that song more and more. And I could resonate. It resonated with me. I could relate so much to it. But I promised myself that I would never, ever, ever do the same things to my children than my father did. So I was married before Noelle. That marriage didn't work out, but I was very cautious. You kind of get this little voice on your shoulder here telling you like, hey, be very cautious. Make sure something just doesn't feel right. And thankfully, I didn't have kids with her. And we were together for about 4.5 years, but didn't have any kids. And it just didn't feel right. And I'm glad we didn't have kids, because I would have broken my promise I made to myself and to God that I didn't want to have kids go through what I went through. Didn't matter if it was a boy or a girl. I didn't want them to go through what I went through. So when I found Noelle and we dated and we got married, it made sense to me. Like, I didn't have this voice saying, be cautious. I had a voice of encouragement saying, hey, Noelle has difficulties with certain things. She has her own anxieties and pressures and things that she had to deal with. But be patient. Work with her. Love on her. Support her. And I've always had that voice with me, and it's still with me today. Now it's not so much as encouraging me. It's more or less saying, be more loving, be more thoughtful, be more caring. And it's been a good thing to have. So when she got pregnant the first time, I cried. I was happy. I was so happy because I felt like I get to, and this kind of is going to the second part of black men not raising their children. I got to experience what it was like to be a father for the first time. I got to hold my child for the first time. Something I was a part of. And I didn't think, when I was a kid, I never thought I would ever be a father. I didn't think I physically could help bring a child into the world. I know that sounds crazy, but I just never thought that I had what it take or what it took to, get a woman pregnant and have a child. I just never thought that. And now, and I guess because it was just, I was kind of far removed from it. But that day when I got to see Zoe, and I had a heart-to-heart talk with Zoe when she was a baby, and this is a different video, but she had breathing issues as when she first came out. So she was in the ICU for a bit, or NICU, I believe. So I had a heart-to-heart talk with her. I felt like something was wrapping itself around me and telling me what to say. That's the only thing I can say. And it gets me a little choked up every time because I felt like at that point I'm a father. I felt like I'm a dad at this point. And that I coached her through the breathing issue. And she's fine now, obviously. But it was scary for me. But I put that to the side because you got to understand, I was happy when Noelle told me that she was pregnant, but I was also petrified because I didn't know how to raise a child. I didn't know how to change a diaper. So I was petrified. Now it's at my doorstep and I have to conquer this particular issue. So for me, it was, what do I do? What do I do? And again, I felt like this cloak around me. I know it sounds crazy, but it basically helped guide me through raising my child. And so it gave me the patience to handle, a crying infant, which I never had to deal with. I never had any younger siblings, so I never had to deal with that. It gave me the ability to just be more understanding and to create a song. There was a song I created for Zoe, and I'm not going to sing it because I'm not a singer. I'm horrible. But she loved it. When she cried, I would sing the song, and I would bounce her as I did it, and she would stop crying every single time. It worked. And even as now, I can do that song with her, and she loves it. I can't do this anymore. She's too heavy. But she loves it still to this day. And I just felt like it something helped me do that. So it goes to the point of saying that black men are not there for their children. I wanted to break that cycle. I don't think that was my father's intention to, and my mother's intention to divorce and that type of thing. But I didn't want my children to go through what I had went through. And to the men out there who have children, or who's in a relationship, I should say, make sure that you're very cautious with what you do, because it's not so much about you. It's not always so much about that other person, but you don't want to put a child in a situation to where they have to climb more and more obstacles in life. Life is difficult for anybody, but not having both of your parents there could be very, very difficult, especially if you are a person of color. Your child's going to be a person of color just by default, no matter who you choose to have a child with. If you're a person of color, your child's going to be a person of color. And life is challenging for anybody. I don't care if you're a white guy that works on Wall Street. Life can be challenging for you. And so you don't want to keep adding more obstacles by not being a part of your child's life. If I'm not saying that you should just stick with the person just for the child's sake necessarily, but you should be very selective in who you choose to be with. And that was something that I took to heart. I may have made bad choices in who I got with, but I made sure that that person was not going to have a child with me. I made sure of that. And back when I got divorced from my first wife, yeah, I lived the life of a bachelor. But I made sure that I did not bring a child into a situation to deal with the things that I had to go through. And so society wants you to believe that there's a lot of children out there. This was a stereotype that I had to deal with too. Not only as a child of being a tall black guy that can play basketball and I can run, but also of how many children do you have and how many mothers. Before I had children, that was the perception. And when I would date people, that's the question that they would ask. And I would say, I have no children and there's no baby mamas. That's always the perception. And when I tell people I have children, a lot of them will look instantly at my hand to see if I'm married. And so the perception is that black men don't take care of their kids. Not true. In fact, I know more white men that don't take care of their kids and not married than I do black. Not saying that there's, one or the other or what the stats are, any of that type of thing, but there's always this negative perception geared towards black men and children and not being responsible. Not true. Right now I can rattle off several people who I know who are damn good fathers who are black. There's also a lot of white men I know who are hell of a good fathers too that I can name. It's situational. People are people. You're going to have idiots in both corners, But I wanted to make sure, for me, that I never put my wife through what my mother went through. My mother had to work 3 jobs. She had to provide for us on her own, especially for me. I didn't have the latest, greatest clothes or the nicest shoes, so my sister, the one who's 14 years older than me, stepped in and got me some shoes. They weren't Jordans like a lot of the other kids had, but she was able to get me some nice, cool Nikes and some clothes and things like that. So she stepped in, and that's why I have such a huge respect for my sister, and I have a huge respect for my mother. My sister and my mother will tell you I've never cussed in front of them. None of my sisters, and never my mother. I've never once cussed in front of them because I respect them that much. And I respect women that much. That's just something I don't really like to do, and I've never done in front of them. When it comes to other women, have I cussed in front of them? Yeah, but it's not like I just rattle them off. I just don't like that. It's just who I am. So I wanted to make sure that I gave Noelle the respect that I wish my mother had. And I wanted her to not struggle the way that my mother did. And I wanted my children to not struggle the way that I did. And for me, it was a matter of saying, enough is enough. I wanted to be the one that went to college, and I was the only one that graduated from a 4-year university. I wanted to be the one that bought my own house. I was the first one to buy my own house, even though I'm the youngest. I wanted to be the one that owned my own business. I'm the first one to actually do that. And not to brag or anything, but I felt like I had to overcompensate for things because of my race, and because of just my upbringing. Not having a father. I felt like I had to do gangbusters in order to prove myself. And in fact, I was afraid when Noelle, people say, are you trying for that baby, the boy baby. You're trying for the third one to be a boy. And I was happy, obviously, that she's pregnant, but I was concerned that if it was a boy, so it's kind of this weird thought. I wanted a boy, but I was afraid to have a boy, right? So I know it's crazy and it doesn't make sense, but I was concerned that if I had a boy, how do I raise a boy? You got to understand, with Zoe, I was scared to begin with because I never had a kid, but I kind of, adjusted with that. When Zara came along, and I was just scared, it was just a child. When Zara came along, I was kind of like, oh gosh, there's another child. But when I was told it was a girl, I'm like, cool, I can rock with that. I know how to raise a girl, I've done it. But then when it was with this one, I was really nervous. So I kept saying, it's a boy, it's a boy, it's a boy, because I was trying to mentally gear myself up to the fact that I could be having a boy. And when the doctor said, no, it's a girl, I felt this weird feeling of kind of like, whew, this weight's been lifted, but also kind of like, man, I wish it was a boy. Happy that obviously our child is healthy regardless. But when we're talking about particulars, that was kind of where I was at. And I was concerned about having a boy for many reasons. For one, I was afraid of the sports thing. Again, my past haunts me. Like there's this perception if you have a boy, sports and football, and I'm not going to be able to have the talk with him. What about fishing, which I didn't do a lot as a kid, and all of these different things, right? But also I was afraid of having a boy, again, a person of color, a boy in this society, in America, you know. I thankfully have not been super harassed by cops, unfortunately, like a lot of other black men have been, or a lot of black men have faced, and other people of color. I haven't been super harassed by them, but I am very leery. I'm very leery. I keep to myself. I try to stay home as much as possible. I try not to be in situations that, obviously I shouldn't be in. I stay away from those things. I stay away from certain people, obviously. But that was a concern for me, is that I was blessed to be born in a city, even though it was in the South, smaller town. There was not a lot of issues in terms of police and black people and police and white people and black people. The town that I'm from, people pretty much kind of got along. Yeah, there was a lot of racism in school. Yeah, there's a lot of history of racism. In fact, the town I'm from was the Confederate capital of that state. But there wasn't a whole lot of major problems. And as I grew up to be an adult and lived there, I didn't have any issues. I was just like everybody else. You go to work, you come home, you do your thing. I didn't have any discrimination against me that I could see once I got out of high school. And I lived in that, in my hometown until I was, I don't know, up to my first marriage. I lived there for several years as an adult. Never once got stopped by cops. Never once had been called out of my name. Never once had any issues. And it's a majority white town, 13% black. Never once had an issue. Never once. So, but I did see a lot of things like everyone else in the media. And then when I moved to Indianapolis and then on to other cities, that's when my concerns started to come in. Like, wow, this could happen. So I was a bit kind of relieved in a way. Having a boy was still been great. Still would have loved my son just as much as I do love my daughters, and how much I'm going to love Zeta. But don't believe everything you see in the media. The vast majority of black people have not committed a crime or been in prison, just like the vast majority of white people haven't. The vast majority of black men are married to their spouse, and they are with their children, raising their kids, and that type of thing, just like the vast majority of white men. The perception is that there's all of this negative, and it's just not true. In fact, when I'm out as a family, I see families. I see white families, I see black families, I see Asian families, Hispanic families, all with the father or father figure there, that type of thing. People are people, is what I'm trying to say. So it's not a race thing that determines how people will treat their family or if they're going to be there or not. And I've learned over time that that's not reality. However, I can do my part and not continue the same cycle that my father, unfortunately, kind of created. Father and mother created. No ill will or disrespect to them, but that reality is reality. That's not what they wanted. They didn't want a divorce, but it happened. So just like I didn't want a divorce from my first wife, it happened. But I wanted to make sure that I had someone that I can depend on, that's dependable. Noelle saved me from a lot, and she made me grow up a lot. So I hold a huge, huge spot in my heart and soul for her. I would die for her any day, and I know she would do the same for me. She's a great person. So if you have someone that's great in your life, let them know how much you appreciate them. That's all I've got to say about this video. Until next time, I'll see you. Take care.